Well, thanks for watching this presentation. What I'm going to do in the next 20 to 30 minutes is just walk you through the new health and safety legislation. I'm not going to go through it chunk by chunk, regulation by regulation. I'm just going to talk about the main features of the Act and why we need to make a difference in New Zealand. But before I start with that, let's just always remind ourselves why we're doing this thing. These are some of the headline statistics. One person every week is dying on average from a work-related accident. 15 people are dying prematurely from occupational ill health. Whichever way you look at it, whether it's through the lens of cost to the economy, which is about $3.5 billion a year, or whether you look at it through the lens of the tragedies that all these figures show, then that's a serious problem, and New Zealand can and must do better. These figures are about twice as bad as those in Australia, about 3 times as bad as those in the UK. The figure that I just want to really emphasise in this is 15 people a week dying from occupational health exposure. We often talk about health and safety. I think we do rather more safety than we do health, but in fact, the nature of the problem is that the health issue is much more serious. So we really need to give that a renewed focus. And what we're talking about here is, I'm going to be talking about the legislation, but what we really need is a new way of thinking about health and safety. This is about looking after each other. This is about making sure that people return from work in a healthy and safe state. That is not about compliance with every letter of the law. This is about making sure that that basic proposition is cemented in New Zealand businesses, and that's what everyone is focused on doing. As I say, changing the law is only the start. It's part of the framework and it's an important part of it. But making a real difference is about changing attitude, which then leads to changed behaviour that then gives us the outcomes that we want. And if I can phrase it this way, it's about moving health and safety from something that's done on a Friday afternoon once you've done all the important business of the week. And it's something you do not just to make sure that you comply with the bare minimum of what the law requires. It's something you do because it's good for your business. It's good for productivity. It's good for staff engagement. It's good for your reputation with your customers and with your suppliers. Good health and safety is good business. That's the attitude that we want to get across. So that's what we're all working towards. The significant reduction, the government has set a target of a 25% reduction in serious harms by 2020. That's a target that the government has set, but it's a target for us all. WorkSafe does not create risk in the workplace. It doesn't manage risk in the workplace. That is the many businesses and organisations out there of which you are part. So I like to think of this as a target for the health and safety system rather than for WorkSafe alone. How are we going to get there? Well, a number of things. We're going to be targeting risk. We'll talk more about this later, but we need to focus on the things that cause the most serious harms. Risk is everywhere. It ranges from the paper cut to the death. We need to be focusing on those which are incidents which are at the serious end of that spectrum. We need to be working together. WorkSafe can't do this alone. We've got to be engaging with trade associations, with workers' organisations, with whoever it can be that we work with that can give us a big effect for our investment of time and effort. We need to work smarter. We need to have better law. That's part of the legislative change that's about to happen. We need that to be supported by regulations and clear guidance, so the expectations are clear between us and those who are regulated as to what good looks like and what acceptable looks like. And all that needs to lead to us working safer as a matter of routine and as a matter of course, rather than as a matter of a separate initiative that is taken within businesses every now and again. So the Health and Safety at Work Act is trying to get across a new way of thinking, making responsibilities clear. So we're trying to shift the issue from what is my responsibility, or in some cases when people ask themselves that question, what they're really saying is, what is not my responsibility and how can I get away with it, to saying actually safety and health is everybody's responsibility. So you can bet your bottom dollar that if you're involved in work, you have a responsibility under this law so you better understand what it is and start discharging it. We're focusing on managing risk. So this is an important point. Businesses and organizations are the ones who create the risk. They are the ones who control it. But risk, as I said earlier, is a feature of life. So we're generally about recognizing what are the things that can cause us harm, how badly could that occur, and to how many people could that occur, and what we can do to eliminate it. Or if we can't eliminate it, what can we do to reduce it to an acceptable level? That's what the process of managing risk is all about. And we require the engagement of workers in this process. Workers they get the bad end and the rough stick of health and safety when it's done badly, and they get some of the benefits when it works well. They're at the sharp end of health and safety. They need to be engaged in the process. Again, we'll talk more about that later. And importantly, the law sets an end to be achieved. It says you need to be safe and healthy as far as reasonably practical. It doesn't say that you must do it in this particular way or that particular way. It gives you the flexibility to adopt the solutions that you think are appropriate to your business, your environment, and your context. That's good. I think that flexibility, it allows you to innovate. It doesn't box you into a straitjacket. But it does mean that you've got to do some thinking about what that means for you. And you've got to devise solutions. We can help with guidance, and we will. Trade associations can help as well, and others producing their own guidance on what good looks like. But you have to apply that to your own situation in a way that suits you. So where do you start in this health and safety journey? And hopefully you've already started. But here's a good place. I mentioned earlier, it's not about managing all risk. It's about managing the most serious risks. So if a paper cut is actually the worst that could happen, why would you spend your time investigating that paper cut or doing anything about it? Cut your losses, get out of that, and focus on the stuff that matters. And it's all about this word proportionality. Proportionality means the effort that you need to go to in terms of the time, the trouble, and difficulty in resolving a health and safety issue needs to be related to the risk that you're trying to prevent. The more serious that risk is, the more effort you have to apply in making sure that that risk is either eliminated or adequately controlled. So, risk assessment can sometimes seem a scary notion to people. They think it's a long and it's a complex process. Well, if you're running a major hazard facility, it does have those elements. But for the generality of businesses and organizations, it is a question of asking a number of basic questions. What are the risks that I'm presented with? What's the likelihood of that happening? It's a risk at the moment in the building where I'm presenting this that a plane might fall on our heads. Is that a realistic risk? No, the probability is extremely low, and actually there's nothing I can do about it. So I don't need to fixate on that risk. It's about looking at the likelihood as well as the degree of harm that that risk could give rise to. And then we look at options to eliminate it. Is there a way of engineering out the risk that we're talking about? Take an example. If I've got a solvent to use in a process, is water good enough? Will that do the job? If it is, and you can replace it with water, you have reduced the hazard and the risk significantly by that one measure. Often that's not an option that's open to us, so we're then into the area of mitigating and controlling the risk that remains. And that's what minimizing risk is all about. But you don't have to do all this from scratch. If there are well-established ways of doing things, if there's guidance out there which sets down some clear, sensible rules for how you go about guarding, whether it's a woodworking machine or whatever it might be, scaffolding a building whilst you're doing some construction or demolition work, then use that guidance. You don't need to work from first principles all the time. And over time, the guidance that will be available to you through WorkSafe and through other organizations will increase. So how does the Health and Safety at Work Act help? Well, this first graphic illustrates how the Health and Safety at Work Act is organized. It really focuses on those people, those organizations, which are key to making it work. And you can instantly see from this slide that actually there are implications for businesses, there are implications for workers, there are implications for senior officers, And then there's a section that talks about how businesses need to cooperate and coordinate their activities to deliver health and safety when they're operating in the same sorts of areas. So let's pick out some of these issues individually and have a look at them in a bit more detail. But focusing on this point that I made at the outset, everybody has a part to play. So let's get our heads around the fact that, yeah, I'm involved in business, I'm involved in an organisation, I need to understand how I fit into this bigger picture. So let's start off with the basic undertaking, the person that's conducting a business or undertaking, the PCBU, which is the new concept that the law introduces. Basically, this usually will not be a person. It could be if you were a sole trader or if you were self-employed. Usually will be a sort of business entity that many of you are working in today. Not necessarily a for-profit organisation, could be not-for-profit, like a government department, or a charity if it had workers working in it who were being paid. So the term is broad, and it's the PCBU's fundamental duty to make sure that its work activities protect its workers and protect anybody else who may be affected by its work activity. So you need to think broadly, not just the people who you directly employ, but those who the work affects, whether they are customers, whether they are visitors, whether they are suppliers, or whether they are your contractors. So think broadly about who your responsibilities relate to as a PCBU. And the primary duty of care is that you need to take such precautions as are reasonably practicable for the health, safety, and welfare of these people. Health and safety starts with leadership. Lots of things start with leadership. Health and safety is no different. So what this new law does is say that leaders in a business who are the senior officers of companies, these are people at the level of chief executive or board directors, they need to exercise this duty of due diligence. So you can see there's a list of the sorts of people that are deemed to be senior officers. And really the aim of this part of the law is to say, if there was a model where some directors and senior officers in companies thought that they could distance themselves from the operations, so long as I hear no evil, see no evil, then I can't be held to account for any failures within the firm. This says, no, you can't do that. You need to be proactive. That's what this duty of due diligence is about, making sure the directors don't get on their overalls and their spanners and go and do the job, but they need to exercise governance over health and safety as they do over other issues connected with their business. They need to have an understanding of the risk profile of their business, the key controls that apply to mitigate those risks. And they need to have a flow of information which tells them whether the policies that they have set and the objectives that they want to achieve are actually being delivered. If a company, or an organisation, a PCBU as we now call them, if they fail in their duty to take reasonably practical precautions, it doesn't necessarily mean that a senior officer has breached their due diligence duty, because it is recognised in this law that senior officers cannot be all over the business 24/7. They just need to have the level of information that is appropriate to their particular role. The next point I want to make is that the law recognises that very few circumstances exist where I, as the boss, engage with my workers between four walls and we have no dealings with anybody in the outside world. That was never true, and it's even less true these days than it ever was. PCBUs work together, and where they work together, they need to cooperate and coordinate their activities. The graphic here is showing a construction environment, which is the clearest example where this operates. We might have an electrician working for one PCBU, working with a joiner who's from another PCBU, who is managed by a contractor who is a third PCBU. All those parties are occupying the same space. One creates the risk for the other, and vice versa. So they need to cooperate. They need to be having a dialogue between themselves as to what risks those are and how they collectively are going to manage those risks effectively. So it requires a degree of planning Think about the stages of work. Think about who is involved in those stages, how the risk profile is going to change as the job proceeds. And then check in with each other as the job is underway to see whether the circumstances are changing and whether we're actually delivering effective health and safety on the ground. Think about C words: communication, coordination, cooperation, which actually, when you're thinking about it, are the keys to getting a successful job done, but they're also keys to getting a safe and healthy job done. And also, one of the things that the Act recognises is that we exist in a world of supply chains. People design stuff, people manufacture stuff, people supply stuff, people use stuff, then people dispose of stuff. Everybody in those chains has a responsibility under this Act to integrate health and safety into what they do. So, if I'm an architect designing what I hope will be award-winning multi-story tower block, which is made completely out of glass on the Wellington waterfront, I need to think about how are the windows going to be cleaned, and I need to build that into the design that is then going to get implemented. If I'm manufacturing a machine or supplying a machine, I need to think about what the risks are involved in that. Can I guard it? Can I box it off? Can I eliminate the particular point that's going to cause somebody injury downstream? And that's important because getting right at the design, the manufacture and the supply stage is almost always more efficient in terms of cost, and it's pretty much always more effective in terms of a sustainable solution. So getting that chain working effectively is a key ingredient so that people who are at the user end of equipment or substances have had the problem, if not dealt with, then at least managed down by the time they use that equipment or that substance. Workers, we've mentioned them before, we'll mention now in the context of who are they? Well, they're broadly defined. They could be anybody: employees, contractors, subcontractors, labour hire company employees, apprentices, and they could be volunteer workers, for example. Volunteer workers being those who are, even though they're not being paid, are essential to the operation of the organisation that they work in and who are doing that on a regular basis. And if they're of that sort, they're not distinguished from, in general, other workers. So workers are a broad concept. This also includes these people as other people who may be affected by work activities. So I mentioned this before: customers, visitors to workplaces. They're people that you need to think about who need protection from these health and safety laws. So workers have responsibilities. They need to comply with the instructions and the procedures which are given them by their organisations, not willfully interfere with the things that are provided for the interests of health and safety. So they need to perform that cooperation responsibility, part of the theme that everybody has a part to play in the health and safety game. But, and I think this is an important and key consideration of the new law, workers need to be engaged and they need to participate in the health and safety process. I mentioned before, health and safety workers, are at the sharp end of health and safety. They're in a great position to spot the difference between top of the office intent and what is actually experienced at the sharp end. WorkSafe did some research a wee while ago, and this was looking at the attitudes to health and safety of workers and their managers across our 4 key sectors of agriculture, forestry, construction and manufacturing. And one of the findings of that survey was that there was often a mismatch in how well those 2 communities felt health and safety was being managed in their business. So if a manager was asked a question such as, do you ever assign jobs to your workers which involve risk and for which they have not been trained, managers say, not very often. If you ask the same question of their workers, they say, oh yeah, that happens quite a bit. What we need to do is bridge that gap between top of the office intent and bottom of the office experience. So get workers engaged and participating in health and safety. And there are lots of spin-offs from that, as well as the improved health and safety performance. Staff who start to feel engaged in the business with their managers. Businesses tell us that has an enormous spin-off in other areas, such as staff engagement with the business generally, productivity, and general business excellence. So we can do this in a number of ways. There are health and safety committees and health and safety representatives, and health and safety reps can be used where workers can channel their views through a representative who can represent them on health and safety matters to their management. Health and safety committees can perform a role where it brings together management and workers to discuss health and safety on a routine business basis. But the key thing is those two words, engagement and participation, not necessarily the method by which that is achieved. So give the workers a voice in what are the risks that they're facing. Give them a voice in terms of asking for their views on whether those risks are being effectively managed. When processes get redesigned or new equipment gets brought into the workplace, engage them to ask them for their views on how risks can most effectively be managed in that environment. So I've mentioned a number of features today. I want to focus on three and bring out three that I think are key to successful health and safety management. The first one is leadership. And I mentioned that due diligence requirement on senior officers before, making sure that the policy is set right in the organisation, the resources are committed to effectively support health and safety, and that those at the top of organisations have an understanding of how they're tracking and how they're truly performing in a health and safety context. I've mentioned workers and their involvement, doing it with the workers, not to the workers, as a vital ingredient. And I've mentioned risk management, the meat in the middle of the sandwich, which is competence, just the capability to understand what risks are being run in a business and some understanding of the controls and mitigations that it's reasonably practicable to introduce to deal with those risks. If we focus on leadership, competence and worker engagement, we'll go a long way to making sure that New Zealand workplaces are healthier and safer. Now, we're there to help. We understand that new law, whatever its nature, can be a bit daunting and difficult. So what we're doing is producing a lot of guidance to help people through understanding the concepts, taking the law off the page of the statute book and actually explaining in plain terms what it's about, introducing an ever-expanding body of guidance, not just text that we're producing in documents, but YouTubes and apps that can help people access the information that they need to be better. Take advantage of that guidance. Those who fear health and safety as something long, complex and bureaucratic, use these tools and make a start. You will find that it is a simpler proposition than you first imagined, but always track back to why we're doing this. So everybody's right that they go home from work healthy and safe at the end of the day. So thanks for watching this, but more importantly, thanks for what you're going to do to help that mission and help New Zealand reduce its workplace toll of accidents and ill health tomorrow and for a long time to come.